Hey everybody, it's Spuggies or BIGCHOMPER, and today I'm making well, probably not a quick video, but a video talking about the current state of Devastation on beta as of 6/23/2024. I do feel like they've kind of moved on from Evoker at this point, and they probably will double back and do some more things, and I might have an egg on my face this Tuesday if they come out with a whole bunch of Devastation changes, but I've been eagerly looking at all the patch notes since they made like the Firestorm changes and everything, kind of hopeful that they were going to make some changes to Devastation still because it is in quite a precarious situation in my opinion. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to make a quick video and basically spark some discussion about it and, tell everyone what my concerns are, what my thoughts are, and ideally open a discussion in the comment section or in my Discord or wherever of people saying, "Hey, I actually think this is really nice. You should revisit your opinion here," or "Yes, this is a problem. Thanks for bringing this to my attention," and just going from there. So I want to first talk about the things that they did well, because I don't want this video to be entirely negative about Devastation and Evoker and stuff like that. Um, so, some things that they did well are primarily on the general tree. So, if you are familiar with the Evoker general tree on live, in my opinion, it's one of the best general trees, or best class trees that exists. I think that there's a lot of meaningful choices on the Evoker tree, and it does actually feel kind of nice. Like I feel like you genuinely are making a difference. Like you make meaningful choices with each of your talent nodes. But what they did is they moved Source of Magic to the right side over here, and they put Renewing Blaze in the middle. And I'm sorry, my Discord's going off. Um, why this is such a good change is because Devastation is, I think, the tightest with the general class tree talents. And that's primarily because we have to take Scarlet Adaptation, Enkindled, and Regenerative Magic. So we basically have 4 talent nodes that we have to take that I believe AUG doesn't. I don't think AUG takes Scarlet Adaptation. I could be wrong, but I know they don't take Enkindled or Regenerative Magic. So we have to take these 3 talent nodes that AUG just doesn't have to take, which is our direct competitor as a damage dealer, kick W. But what that enabled them to do was to have all the utility they ever wanted in Mythic Plus at a single time, while Devastation had to consistently give something up to get everything they wanted, right? We couldn't have Source of Magic, Oppressing Roar, Terror of the Skies, and Unravel. We couldn't have it all. We'd have to make kind of a decision between, oh, are we okay giving this up for this crap, blah, blah, blah. What this change enables us to have is essentially take rescue easier, because we always want everything in the middle besides this talent right here and this talent right here in Mythic Plus. And this just kind of gives us a straight shot down the middle, straight to aerial mastery, which is really nice. And we also don't have to path through Panacea to get Renewing Blaze anymore like we used to. This is still a pretty good talent, but I definitely think like if you're weighing Panacea against like Unravel in certain dungeons, or Terror of the Skies, or Oppressing Roar, uh, those 3 talents are going to pull ahead almost every single time. And with Incorporeal or Afflicted or anything like that, like you'd have to take Sleepwalk and occasionally Overall with Raging, and we just simply really struggled with that talent budget. And having this extra talent node right here is really going to help out. Source of Magic, it just doesn't really do well in Mythic Plus, in my opinion. Like, there's just better things to take overall than your healer doing a little bit more damage and having a little bit more mana. It just doesn't matter that much comparatively, at least in my opinion. So that was a big W that they did. The other great thing, and I'm going to kind of go on a little bit of a tangent about AUG here, is Spatial Paradox. So AUG is, if you listen to like Liquid and Echo's rhetoric and some of the higher end guys, they say that AUG is a required raid buff. Okay, AUG is not a required raid buff in a regular CE team. I would say even like US 100 and below, AUG is not required. It is nice to have, don't get me wrong, but it's not doing the damage that Liquid and Echo are seeing from it, right? So AUG is very hard to quantify. I think everybody knows that. The logs are completely broken about them. And that basically leaves the rest of us guilds kind of listening and heeding the guilds that actually have the means and infrastructure to verifiably test what AUG is doing. So in guilds like Liquid and Echo, which are basically the ones who are saying, hey, is AUG required, this or that, they have very good players. In fact, they have an officer called the Augficer that is dedicated to basically aligning cooldowns for their augmentation players. Augmentation is the single most class in the game where if you do like a micro optimization or something like that, you're going to see the biggest gain comparatively to other classes. Like, you know, with Devastation, doing something like clipping and chaining and things like that, it does not yield nearly the same gain that an AUG focusing up and like using their prescience wisely and things like that would. They're just going to see a much more significant gain. So yes, in guilds like Liquid and Echo, and if your Augmentation Evoker is extremely dedicated, you are going to see crazy numbers. But in most guilds, you're just not going to see that. Now, I will concede that in these lower end guilds, augmentation, like skill parity is off in these lower end guilds, right? Like my guild, for example, our skill parity is off. What AUG allows us to do in my guild is to basically let the better or more throughput players shine even brighter. So we have like, you know, let's just say for, I guess, explanation's sake, like let's say we have 4 really good players. AUG just makes those 4 really good players even better, which is also very good in a lower end guild. But at least from the perspective of is AUG required, from like a throughput perspective, they're absolutely not in just like a regular team. What made them required was this stupid button right here, Spatial Paradox. So Spatial Paradox was AUG specific only button that, you know, essentially just, it's insane healer utility. It made fights like Smolderon, Farrak, other fights extremely easy, and it no matter what fight you were on, this helped out on. And that's like the crazy part about it, and that's what really made AUG just so insane, is that when you did need it, this button really shined, and when you didn't have it, like let's say an AUG was absent for a night, it just messed up your healers significantly and fucked up prog, which really sucked. So then moving this to the general tree and giving it a slight nerf, I think is a really wise decision. At least from like a Devastation perspective, it increases our raid viability in just regular guilds a ton. I still think at the higher end, they're not really going to want Devastation Evokers unless we are overtuned, or there's a fight that Unravel goes really hard on, something like that. But otherwise, I don't really know how, you know, where Devastation would fit in comparison to AUG. AUG is just better. They've gotten substantial changes on the beta that are all positive as far as I'm aware. It could be wrong. And it does kind of feel like Devastation has been left in the dust a little bit. But another W about AUG is that they've recognized that AUG is problematic. They've said, hey, you know, we recognize that doing these high keys with Augmentation Evoker is, like, Augmentation Evoker is a necessity in these high keys. And they recognize that as being an issue. They're retuning Mythic Plus to not reward stops as much. So, like, that already decreases the value of them because they have an extra knock built into their kit through Upheaval. And I think that they're going to make things less one-shotty, I guess. Don't get me wrong, AUG will still be really good, but they need to award damage a little bit more, because that's always going to be the con of AUG and Mythic Plus. They just need to make it an actual thing that AUGs need to play around, and groups with AUGs need to play around, because losing the damage and having the more utility, I think, should be the benefit of having AUG. Or, you know, they're kind of trending in the direction of taking away some of their utility. You know, make them do the same amount of damage as a regular DPS, just remove some of the crazy-ass utility they have, along with damage reduction built into their kit, and just make it so they're a regular DPS, except they just DPS through other people. I think that's a much better direction for AUG. Yeah, I would say that concludes all the stuff on the general tree. That's pretty good. On the Devastation tree, it's a kind of a somber side over here, but I will say that a W over here is that they are trying to fix the left side of the tree. They recognize that Firestorm is a problematic ability, and they have added many talents to significantly buff it. They've made Snapfire also work with Living Flame. That's awesome. Or sorry, with Pyre. That's awesome. Makes it significantly better. They made Firestorm scale with haste. Feed the Flames is now has an extra component to it that Pyre and Disintegrate deal 20% more damage. This is all awesome. This is really good. That they're trending in the direction of making this more viable, but there's still a problem with that, which we'll get into later. They also added in a completely new talent, Scorching Embers. Fire Breath causes enemies to take 20% increased damage from your red spells. Really good talent. That's an insane amount of throughput in AoE. Basically just a 20% damage buff, right? Then they made Imminent Destruction into a capstone talent. Deep Breath reduces the essence cost of Disintegrate and Pyre by 1 and increases their damage by 10% for 12 seconds, which is the new component. So why this is kind of cool is that it lines up exactly with Melt Armor. Melt Armor lasts for 12 seconds, so essentially you're benefiting from Imminent Destruction for the same duration as Melt Armor, which is a kind of a nice link between the two. I think that that's super cool. So moving to our hero talents, I will say that Devastation probably did get the better end of the stick with hero talents, but as classes are getting more and more hero talent reworks, iterations and things like that, I see Devastation falling further and further down the list, along with a few other reasons which I'll get into later. But thematically, our hero talents are very, very, very cool, and I think that that's what's truly important, is just having a cool looking like a good theme for your hero talents, rather than them being like super fun to play. Or them being fun to play and having a cool theme is better than like overall power, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. And I think that Scale Commander has an awesome theme with like the Evokers flying around, or the Drakthir flying to come like shoot pyres at your enemies. I was playing with Extended Battle, and it was crazy how many Evokers I was getting at one point flying across, and in fact I was getting like 2 to 3 at one time that were like flying in cross wing section, like X's, which was really, really neat. So I mean, I definitely prefer Scale Commander over Flame Shaper. I think Engulf is kind of a lame ability, but Flame Shaper does have some really awesome stuff on the tree. Like we have Exploding Keg built into Tail Swipe and Wing Buffet, which just, it makes your tank essentially immune to damage for 4 seconds. Really awesome. And then we have Renewing Blaze, also applies to your target or one nearby ally when it's cast. This is literally insane to put on a tank. You put it on a tank, they go into a pack, they just heal up so much, man. So freaking much. This, like, overall, Flame Shaper, I think, will be the premier option for Mythic Plus, just because its utility is so good. It's so good. Engulf is definitely, like, AoE based. I could still see a world where, Scale Commander is used in Mythic Plus. Like, don't get me wrong. Deep Breath absolutely pumps with this ability, and there is some cool shit in here. But just the utility that's built in the Flame Shaper is so insane. Even if this was a little bit of a damage loss, I could maybe see Flame Shaper still being the premier option when you're pushing, just because of all these cool utility options. But yeah, overall, I think like hero talents are pretty cool. I really like the thematic of Scale Commander. Flame Shaper, I don't like the thematic as much, but the utility is really neat. Engulf does have the potential to like do some pretty crazy burst damage, which is nice. I think this is much cooler for Preservation, but yeah. So I would say that concludes what went well with Devastation. Let's kind of talk about what went bad, which is the majority of the video. So, the first thing that I would say is absolutely terrible is them doubling down on Firestorm. So they added in, they're trying their best to make Firestorm fixed. But the problem is that the spell is just fundamentally incorrigible. Firestorm is a big, huge reticle on the ground that does not move at all, that is essentially acting as a maintenance buff. Yes, if you get lucky with your Snapfire procs and drop a whole bunch of them and have a bunch of haste, Firestorm does do a pretty decent amount of damage. I don't think anyone's questioning the efficacy of the damage if people remain in it. What is frustrating about it is no matter how much haste you have, the duration of the spell does not change. It still lasts for 12 seconds, and it still takes that amount of time for all the damage to get out, including how the spell is designed. The spell is designed such that you're stacking Firestorm on Firestorm on Firestorm. So the 12 seconds is even irrelevant at that point, because you're essentially in this situation where you want to ideally you want to stack your Firestorms on top of each other. You want them all to be hitting all the enemies, and it just incentivizes like the tank standing still even more. It's like having a Wild Spirits, if you guys played Shadowlands, that is up 100% of the time. That is insanely frustrating. It's not a burst phase, it's a maintenance buff. And I think whenever you kind of curb your thinking into that, you start to realize the problem that Firestorm is that, hey, I have a maintenance buff that increases my damage effectively by 20%, and anytime the tank walks out of it, I'm just losing all that damage. It just sucks. It doesn't make us on par with Destro Warlocks. It doesn't, I don't think that it just has the same efficacy or power. It's just frustrating as hell. Like I was doing a single target encounter, which again, this is like if you spec into this, you have to use this as single target because there's a disintegrate component to it. And regardless of that, you'd want to use your spell in single target, even if it's more geared towards AoE. If you have a boss that the tank needs to move around and you're not getting a Snapfire proc, this shit is just so frustrating. There was so many fights on the beta where, I guess I can't pull up the dungeon, but I was doing, what's the boss called? The City of Threads, the first boss, like the tank has to move that boss around, and I drop my Firestorm and he instantly moves out of it. And it's not because he's like trying to mess me up, it's because he has to move out of it. And I guess that, you can make the argument where, oh, well, some dungeons are just going to be good for Firestorm and some aren't. But they're clearly trying to make a left side AoE, right side single target. So why is there ever a situation where our AoE build is just frustrating and stupid to play in Mythic Plus? It's just ignorant and dumb. The spell, they have implemented cool talents to work with the spell. I think Pyre exploding into Firestorm and then adding in the damage component, moving it up. I think them changing Snapfire, all like good changes, don't get me wrong. But you have to give up so many points to get this stuff. Like, for some reason, volatility can't go straight to Firestorm. You have to path into through here. Again, this is not a talent you normally take in Mythic Plus, so you have to take 1, 2, 3, 4 talents to even make this viable, and potentially, you really want Scorching Embers with it as well, because this increases your red damage. Firestorm's a red spell. You potentially, like, I don't know the sims off the top of my head, but you have to invest 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 talent points to make this spell, somewhat good. While with Shattering Star, it's 2 nodes. All we have to do, like this is already like a pretty good node right here, and it doesn't relate to Shattering Star. You have to invest in Shattering Star and Focusing Iris, or you actually take Arcane Vigor. But it's just 2 talent nodes to get a really, really strong and really, really nice spell. And I guess you could argue maybe 3 with Eternity Span, but that's kind of irrelevant. I just think that the talent budget over here to get Firestorm online is just way, way too much. Way too much. And you can like kind of see the cracks in the foundation here, because, your solution might be, okay, well, let's just like combine some nodes here. Like, let's put Snapfire and Feed the Flames all as one talent node. Dude, that talent node would be so busy. It would be one of the busiest nodes in the game, having that many effects on that node. And it just kind of shows the fundamental problem with Firestorm, is that to make this button even like worth pressing, kind of fun, kind of cool, you have to significantly augment it. You have to give it so many stupid talents to try to make this an appealing choice. And the fact of the matter is that they're trending in the direction of tuning it such that it is going to be the best choice in the game for us to pick, I bet, in AoE. So we're just essentially trolling by not by not taking Firestorm in Mythic Plus. And it just feels like shit, Like, Firestorm looks awesome. I love how this spell looks. It's so cool. But it just, it's terrible to play with. It's not fun. Oh my gosh. Hold up. Sorry, I got absolutely flashbanged by my Discord call. That thing was so loud. I'm sorry if that got to the video. But anyways, I think I was talking about how Firestorm is just a big talent commitment for it to be somewhat viable. It's very true. Annoying to play around. Awesome ability. I think that a fix for Firestorm could be that they just make it follow the targets, but I think even that's a little bit fundamentally flawed, because then you have kind of a weird situation where how do you pick and choose who it follows? Does it follow the nearest target? What if that target goes awry or gets knocked or whatever? And then Firestorm, the play style of it is you have a whole bunch of Firestorms out at once. Like, let's say you have 4 of them. Are those just going to be like following like a bunch of mobs around and making the whole area into a huge red reticle for everyone and basically cover ground effects, things like that? I think that too would be frustrating. I think that a better solution is maybe to like get rid of this shit, feed the flames, and I don't know, get rid of Snapfire as well. And I would rather them have a kind of mechanic where you build up your Firestorm. Like, as you spend pyres and things like that, you get procs that make your Firestorm either like shoot down pyres and grow in size or grow in power and kind of start off as this like kind of meek storm, and as you build it up, it just becomes this like raging inferno shooting down pyres and meteors or whatever. I think that would be really, really cool. And it would also wouldn't be this like frustrating gameplay of like, oh, okay, I'm pyring. Okay, time to Firestorm, Firestorm, Firestorm. Like, I think that's just kind of like stupid. And I also just hate how they're trying to make up for this being like a stupid ground effect by you being able to cast it a bunch, because then you're just missing out on damage, because ideally you want to stack them on top of each other and keep benefiting from the damage. So it's a spell that just kind of works against itself. It'd be much cooler if like you're building up the storm and it gets more and more devastating and powerful as it goes on. I think that's a lot more fun of a play style, and especially if they added some cool visuals with it, I could end up being really cool. But yeah, that's my spiel about Firestorm. And that kind of leads into the secondary issue that Devastation's having, which is the talent budget at the bottom. So Devastation has a significant issue right now where there are 2 capstone talents that Dev just feels absolutely like a noodle and stupid when you're not playing with them. Those 2 talents are Causality and Scintillation. The Causality is so integral to Devastation's kit, right? It has been a fundamental part of how Devastation plays. You're spending your essence, going fast, and reducing your empowers, and then sending those out, and you're just kind of the self-sustaining system. Having that locked behind a capstone talent, even though it is a capstone level power, it is too fundamental to the class for it to be a capstone. It's like how Destrolock had Infernal as a capstone talent for so long. And then they made the decision to move it up. Like, we need to have Causality much easier to access, and pretty much never a situation where you don't have Causality. Causality should almost be like they combine the Essence Burst right here, like they have on Aug, and they just put Causality right here, or move all this crap up or something like that. But I would like a scenario where Causality is something you almost never talent out of. You always have this talent. Devastation just feels super weird when you're not playing with it. It removes a ton of the cool interactions that like Pyre has with volatility, along with like Disintegrate, Mass Disintegrating, and things like that. It just plays into how Devastation works as a whole really well. And I would like to see them move it up. I don't know where they would put it. There's a lot of like stupid talents, like increasing your Disintegrate damage. Like, why is this a freaking talent? There's give an aura buff to Disintegrate when people are in Devastation. But I would like to see them move this up. Scintillation is one that I don't think should be something you always have to take, but it should be further up the tree and very, very, very accessible. Just because there are scenarios where you're never clicking Disintegrate, like on a council fight, council in Vault of the Incarnates. And just at least from like my design perspective, I would never make a talent tree where you have a useless button, like a button that's you have to talent into something that is useless in a form of content. You should always be able to granularly choose your talent nodes, and if something is just not useful in AoE or in single target, why are you forced to be talented into it, aka Pyre? But yeah, scintillation should definitely be moved up the tree, and causality and scintillation just too integral to the class. It also creates this like really weird talent struggle at the bottom where you can't get causality and scintillation with all the Firestorm crap you want, so then you have to play without scintillation, which just feels terrible. I feel like scintillation is like one of Devastation's hallmarks, so them removing it is just super off base. It's probably the coolest talent in the Devastation tree by far. So yeah, I not too happy about the current talent nodes. It wasn't a huge issue in retail right now just because the left side of the tree was so dead and you didn't want anything else besides like all these 3 talent nodes right here. But yeah, definitely blows that this is a reality with causality and scintillation, and it hasn't been addressed or even acknowledged. Another thing, the third thing I would probably talk about is Eternity Surge and Pyre. So Eternity Surge, it feels like there just isn't a lot of love for Eternity Surge. I have coached a few people, talked to a lot of Devastation players, and they say, like, the common thing that I hear between them is Eternity Surge feels almost like busy work clicking it. The only time we like want to click and charge up Eternity Surge and it feels like impactful and powerful is whenever our tier set is enabling it. Like our current tier set in Season 4 and Season 2 of Aberrus makes Eternity Surge empower our shards. And also, Eternity Surge just extends Dragonrage. It gives us iridescence charges, but overall, this is supposed to be like Devastation's hallmark ability, in my opinion. Way more than Pyre. Pyre is like a Devastation hallmark ability, but Pyre is also our AoE spender, so like why is it the button that we have to spec into? This is just useless in single target and we're forced to spec into it. Move Eternity Surge up here and make it so that we have a choice of whether to spec into Pyre or not, or just make Pyre baseline. Like Rain of Fire is baseline for Destro Warlock, and there's so many other classes where the AoE spender is just simply baseline. We are losing a talent node by having to spec into this shit that is not even useful in single target. It is so frustrating. Make Eternity Surge into our hallmark ability at the top, and add in capstone talents that augment it. Add in more things that make it cool. This talent node right here is so boring. Reduces Eternity Surge by 3 seconds, or it does 15% increased damage. Whoop-de-fucking-do. This is just not cool, not fun. Make it so we have a choice node between Glittering Surge or like an Eternity Surge that marks targets with something. I thought how they were going to implement Mass Disintegrate was with Eternity Surge. I thought that they were going to have Eternity Surge mark the targets, and then your next Disintegrate was going to Mass Disintegrate on top of all of them. That would have been a super awesome interaction that Devastation has. And it would make it so that you are wanting to charge Eternity Surge up in AoE. But the fact of the matter right now is that unless you're like hitting 4 targets or like a low target amount, you just don't charge this shit up. You just do it at rank 1. If you're doing like a mass pull AoE in Mythic Plus or something like that, you don't charge it up. I talk about this a lot in my Mythic Plus videos and things like that. But it just feels like a super underwhelming ability. And again, like Firestorm, it's super cool. It looks awesome. Like, Eternity Surge is one of the best looking abilities in the game, in my opinion. And it sucks that I'm very rarely charging it up all the way. It really blows. They could have made Mass Disintegrate a much more integral part to the thing. They could have made it hit 8 targets and potentially Or yeah, 8 targets. Uh, and they could have made Eternity Surge, given it a lot, like a breath of fresh air, and make it feel like a really cool button to click. Because this shit, I mean, like, it does good damage and things like that in single target, but here, I'll pull up the thing. All right, I was able to pull this up. I pull it up every video, I feel like, but it just sucks that Eternity Surge, which is supposed to be such an impactful and cool button, is something that in AoE, even with Eternity Span, we don't send at the max rank any times. Like 8 to 9 targets, even though, you know, it can, at rank 3, it can hit all the 8 targets, you still send it at rank 1 because it just doesn't calculate out to be a damage gain. I think that it's a super big flaw that Eternity Surge isn't always a huge damage gain or feels like an awesome button to press. When Augs get to click upheaval, that button feels super good, dude. It knocks everything up, the effect looks awesome, and it does some of their largest damage, I believe. So, you know, super sad about Eternity Surge. I would really like to see more talent nodes that augment it, make it cooler. I'd like to see it move to be our primary button and make it so that Pyre is either baseline or something that we can talent into and choose to talent out of on patchwork encounters when it's not useful. I also think that always giving Evokers Pyre leads to the situation where Dev can and will pad, rather than like a fight like Gnarl Root. The ads don't really like do anything once you're on farm and things like that. It's much more important to just hit the boss and, you know, cause like letting Evokers have Pyre, I feel like just leads to, you know, more greedy gameplay as a whole. Letting them like either have this baseline or talented out of it would absolve some of those issues, because they could add in more single target nodes that make it so you don't want to take volatility because you're just not losing that much otherwise. They're just missing a lot here that could be really, really cool. So the next item I had on my list, yeah. So I was hoping for a reverse execute button of some sort. So the fourth thing would be reverse execute. Execution is a big part of World of Warcraft. There are so many classes that have execute mechanics, right? There's warrior, hunters, shadow priest. There's a whole bunch of guys in the game that do something during execute. And Evoker is one of the most unique classes in the game where Giant Slayer does reverse execute. So they missed out on a really neat opportunity to give Devastation its own execute button that is possibly only usable at high health, but always usable within Dragonrage, and essentially deck it out with a ton of really cool talents that, like, let's say you can pop it or you can use it at any time. Like warriors can get, I think it's called Sudden Death, I'm not sure, but they can just use execute at any health percent as long as they get the proc. They could have given like a red and blue spell kind of hybrid together that essentially tries to sunder and execute the target at high healths. I think that would be really cool. It would give our mastery even more flavor and more coolness. It could function like Shattering Star, where it gives us an essence burst too. It just feels really nice to press and click. I think that they definitely missed out on that, and that's it's really sad for me to see. For me to see. I also could see how it would be frustrating, but overall, I think it would be very thematic and another button for Devastation to press, which is good. I do feel like we are a little low on buttons per se, but we're actually kind of in line now with how many rotational buttons other classes have now. It seems like they're doing kind of a big pruning effort. So, yeah, I guess we're good in that department. The fifth thing, which is probably the biggest bitching point overall, sorry, taking a sip, is animosity. So, even our Lord and Savior Preheat made a video over this, I believe. The nerf kills Devastation for me in the War with Ed. And, you know, when the fucking god of Devastation is dooming on it, that's when you know it was a fucking rough change, man. So what they did is they basically capped Dragonrage. And in the post that they capped it, they said, We are trying to reel in the effects of power infusion on Devastation. Okay, let that sink in. They're trying to reel in the effects of another class's spell on our spec, so they nerf and completely change one of the fundamental parts to how Devastation has played for a whole expansion. Devastation's whole gimmick was to lower your empowers with causality and extend your Dragonrage with animosity. That was the whole gimmick, was this. That was Devastation. And that's what also led to all the skill expression for Devastation, too. Devastation is a fairly straightforward class outside of just being an Evoker, having a 25-yard range, and also clipping, chaining, knowing how to manage your essence, how to work with proper hoarded power procs, how to work with your essence burst, you know, things like that, and as well as power swell, which we play in live right now. All of that was basically in an effort to get a longer Dragonrage, okay? Because, you know, all of it basically boiled down to was managing your essence well and spending it effectively and efficiently to get a longer Dragonrage. Them capping it to be 16 seconds, which is, you can literally get that with 0% haste, is absolutely ridiculous. This is a terrible cooldown now, in my opinion, or just not that fun. It's not that good. You can only extend it by 16 seconds from the base 18. We used to be able to get like 4, 5, 6 extensions, I believe, something like that. And especially with all the hero talents we have coming in, that these were going to make getting extensions even easier. You know, we were probably going to have a +1 to our default extension level. It is absolutely terrible that they made this decision. To basically make our cooldown somewhat good now, we have to invest 3 talent points. We have to invest 1 into Dragonrage, 1 into Animosity, 1 into Tyranny, to make this a somewhat good CDR. And regardless of the tuning of it or anything, it just feels like shit now. Dragonrage feels like a complete shell of what it used to be. It feels terrible. It does not feel fun. It doesn't feel impactful. It doesn't feel like you're like racing against the clock anymore. It doesn't feel like you can express your skill during it at all, besides just knowing whether to click Pyre or Disintegrate. It's just terrible, and it removes a big part of the class for me. You know, how I used to separate myself from other Devastations was by being knowledgeable about clipping and chaining and managing my essence and being able to get the longer extensions. And now, you know, what the hell's the point? There's no point in like rushing to spend my essence anymore. I might as well just chain everything. It simply does not matter, because I'm not trying to get more ticks with causality. I'm not trying to do anything, because I'm simply locked to what Dragonrage can be. Now, do I think them limiting Dragonrage is a bad thing? I actually do not, which could be surprising to everyone. I do think that it takes away a large skill expression that Devastation had, but it was an issue, okay? Devastation's playstyle with PI, with Lust, with specifically Hoarded Power, was super RNG whether you could extend Dragonrage to the maximum number that Dragonrage could be. So, from my perspective, it is frustrating when a class's feel and how it plays is significantly based off of chance and externals. That is annoying, and I will concede that power infusion was a problem on Devastation, because it's not like it just made us do more damage. It did. Like other classes, they give it PI and it just does more damage. It, you know, it doesn't even like necessarily feel good. They just do more damage with it. With Devastation, we literally felt bad without PI. It felt bad that you couldn't reach an extension that you otherwise could with power infusion when you weren't getting power infusion because we weren't like the #1 simming class word or whatever. That is frustrating. I hate power infusion. But the solution is not to gut our class design. The solution is to remove the button from the game if you recognize it is hampering other specs in the game. Excuse me. But I am overall happy that they are, well, I'm not happy that they're doing this, but I'm happy that they're trending in the direction of limiting Dragonrage. I do think that this is a good decision overall, just because of how Hoarded Power works and how frustrating that can be. I think that that's okay. This is frustrating to me personally, and I'm generally okay with them limiting it. The problem now is that it's 3 talent nodes for a mediocre 2-minute cooldown. So my proposed solution to this is to make Devastation a 1-minute class. So they need to bake Animosity into Dragonrage. Okay, it doesn't need to be 2 talent nodes. Dragonrage needs to be a 1-minute cooldown, and essentially you can extend it not up to 16 seconds. You can honestly even remove this component and just make this into a 25-second cooldown or whatever, a 25-second duration, as it's 1 minute. And you could even make this talent node, Animosity, into making Dragonrage into a 1-minute cooldown. So they could basically change this into making Dragonrage into a 1-minute cooldown. But I still don't think that that's powerful enough for 2 talents. So I would also like to see Onyx Legacy baked into Animosity. So essentially, we have a talent node that's reducing both Deep Breath and Dragonrage into a 1-minute cooldown, and basically that just makes us a 1-minute class baseline. I think that that would be an excellent change, and it would be a good give, as they've taken away so much from Devastation. They took away our extensions, and they didn't give us anything to make us feel better. That's awful. I also think that they could take Tyranny away and just bake it into Dragonrage by default. So essentially, we take Tyranny away, put it into Dragonrage, take the extension aspect away of Dragonrage, make this into 25 seconds, make Animosity into making Dragonrage 1 minute, and Deep Breath into 1 minute. I think that that would be a really cool design, and I would actually definitely play Devastation if it was a 1-minute class. I think Dragon Raging basically every 30 seconds and being within Dragonrage every 30 seconds is a really fun playstyle. And I think that that would make up for the lack of skill expression that removing Animosity as it is now would be. Because then we have basically 30-second burst windows that we need to execute well and correctly, and that could be kind of the new skill expression of sorts. So, you know, overall, there's just a huge issue with Dragonrage right now. It's simply not doing enough damage, or sorry, it's simply not fun to play around, and it's a absolute shell of its former self. So I think that what I've proposed could potentially fix it. There are a number of ways to fix it, though, and I would really like to hear how you guys would like Dragonrage to function in the future, or if you generally think that this is fine. But just from my perspective, I think that 3 talent nodes for a mediocre 2-minute cooldown that's been absolutely watered down from what it used to be is terrible. Okay. Sorry, I got interrupted again. But I think that that concludes all the stuff on the spec tree that I personally have an issue with. So the last thing is really the hero talents. So I think, you know, like I conceded earlier, that thematically these are really, really cool hero talents. You know, the Drakthir flying across and like shooting the bombardments out and essentially like having the fantasy of commanding those guys, I think is really, really cool. And then Flame Shaper is, you know, not as cool thematically, but I do think that Engulf has a high fun factor that it could be really, really big burst damage. And also there's some really cool utility within the Flame Shaper tree. So overall, I mean, they're just not terrible at all. But the big issue I have is with Scale Commander. So Scale Commander is supposed to be themed around, you know, summoning these bombardments, flying around. I totally understand all of that. Like, I understand why Deep Breath is a big part of the big part of the hero talents, because you're flying around, commanding these guys. I think that the bombardments absolutely look amazing. They are some of the coolest parts of what we're receiving, if not the coolest part. The thing that really bugs me is the Mass Disintegrate being in the Scale Commander tree. It really sucks that there is a world where Devastation is going to play without Mass Disintegrate. Mass Disintegrate is something that we've been longing for so long. We saw Sarkareth have Mass Disintegrate. We saw that one boss in Azure Vaults have it. I think his name's like Greywing. Mass Disintegrate is just something we've known that we were going to get from the get-go, and it sucks so much ass that it is locked behind a hero talent tree. Because if there's ever a world where Flame Shaper is meta, we're just not seeing Mass Disintegrate. We're not seeing what makes our hero talents cool. And like I suggested earlier, this should 100% be a capstone talent in the tree. I would have really liked them to add in a capstone talent of Mass Disintegrate. Eternity Surge marks all targets for Mass Disintegration, and then essentially right after Eternity Surge, your Disintegrate would essentially cleave onto all the targets it marked. I think that that would be a way more fun cooldown. And also, it wouldn't be this weird thing where like Mass Disintegrate does less damage based off the target amount or whatever. I think that this is just kind of strange, where if you're sending one Mass Disintegrate on a single target thing, it just does 75% more damage, and it looks the exact same, which is so lame. I wish that all 3 of the beams went into the single target. Then that would make more sense to me, but yeah, I am super disappointed and sad about Mass Disintegrate, which I think is contrary to how a lot of people feel. But, you know, just being able to play Devastation Evoker going forward without Mass Disintegrate, I think, is just so terrible. It is such an oversight. It should be something that we always have access to in Mythic Plus. It should be that we have Engulf and Mass Disintegrate, not one or the other. And this tree should just be solely passive and focused around the bombardments. Bombardments should be the key talent right here. They should add in another talent to augment it. And, you know, I would even be okay with them removing the Deep Breath component and just focusing solely on the bombardment aspect. But I do understand the Deep Breath component. I just don't get why Mass Disintegrate is a scale commander ability. I think that that's just super stupid. I think it's pretty unoriginal that they're using this as a hero talent. Like, come on, man. It should be a capstone talent 100%. So, pretty disappointed there. Other than that, I think that's my only qualm with the hero talents overall. That this just feels really bad. I would say the last thing, the last gripe I have with Evoker as a whole is just the range that we have. So they tried to do this like 25-yard range thing, and they did do it throughout all of Dragonflight. And for the first tier, it wasn't a big problem because it seemed like with Vaulting the Incarnates, they were extra careful of designing every boss to be kind to Evokers. But it seems like as the expansion went on, they increasingly became more and more desensitized to Evokers, and they didn't really want to like appeal to them anymore. So then we had fights like Nimue, which if you did Mythic Prog as a Devastation Evoker or even Augmentation Evoker on Nimue, it was absolutely terrible. You know, we were trying to like soak the things and also having to stay close to the boss. You know, I had to tell people, hey, go back because we're only short range and people have to play around us, and it feels absolutely awful, like telling people you need to go do something because I have this artificial limitation. I think that, you know, them fundamentally designing a class that's like our spec that's like a turret, like Devastation is a turret class, and essentially how they kind of solve that is with hover. But the fact of the matter is that why are we only in hover 60% of the time or something like that? There's a spec in this game that can move while casting 100% of the time and has 40-yard range. So why is it so egregious and insane to assume that Devastation Evoker, like you're already gimping Evoker as a whole with the 25-yard range thing, just make it so we can cast while moving 100% of the time sans empowered abilities. And I think that that would be an actual fair trade-off. Unfair trade-off is a spec existing in the game that can cast while moving 100% of the time, and they have 40 yards, and we can't, and we have 25 yards. And they consistently say, oh, well, the trade-off is that Evoker has some insanely good movement, so, you know, that's where they shine. And, like, I do feel agile as an Evoker, but it's definitely not to the level of, like, a monk anymore. It's not to the level of some other classes, and especially, like, BM Hunter. It sucks. It feels like we should have more for such an insane limitation. Our range is a super big limitation, and it drives people away from the class. almost immediately, just because it's an artificial thing that's stupid. Like on Farok, I had to do a seed, and it was just very stupid. It felt like I was trolling the whole time because I couldn't go like 40 yards away from the fight or from the boss. I had to, stay within 20 yards because you don't want to go like to exactly 25, because if you're like, that's just like kind of playing a fool's game if you're staying at your exact max range, because you could end up missing a few GCDs and things like that. So you ideally want to stay like 20 to 23 yards away, and it's just simply too close. Like I was too close to some of the blazes and things like that, and that's just like a limitation that other classes simply did not have. Preservation Evoker, I think it messes with the most. Max even spoke about how they wanted to play Preservation Evokers in all of Mirdrasil, but they couldn't because they felt like the range was too limiting for them. It would create too many roadblocks. And that sucks that a class is supposed to be quite good for a given raid tier or something like that, but they are limited artificially, and that's very lame, very stupid. So I would like to see them double back on this range decision, but it doesn't look like they're going to. Or simply give us more hover charges, give us more access to hover, increase the duration of it, which seems greedy. It definitely seems greedy, but if you just do apples to apples and compare Evoker to other range specs, it makes sense. If you're going to give us this stupid limitation, then give us an insane buff for it. Yeah, so that's it. Those are my thoughts on Devastation as a whole right now. If the current iteration of Devastation were to go live, I unfortunately would not play it. I don't think in the War Within. They're just doing so many other classes justice right now. They're making Arcane Mage into an absolute baller. They're making Warlock as a whole into a great spec, and frankly, like, our great class. And frankly, like, I have my eye on those two, are on Warlock and Arcane Mage, way more than I do Evoker right now, just because it feels like Evoker is almost the exact same, but significantly worse, and taken away what made it special. And that really sucks. So, I'll probably kind of rewatch this video, compile it into a text form, and then make my posts on the forum and the Devastation feedback. But I'm sure a lot of this stuff has been said on that forum already. But it is truly important for us to like give feedback to the developers and give them Devastation feedback, because if we want to see changes like 1 minute Dragonrage and giving us more talent budget and making Firestorm into something that's more fun to play around, we just simply have to let them know. We're not going to see the changes that we want to see from, I guess, just bitching and moaning in our personal discords. We're going to see that by actually posting on the forums and kind of making an upset. Because, I would like to think that the people who watch this stuff are people who are really passionate about Devastation, and ideally we want to guide it in a direction that is the most fun overall. So definitely encourage that. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, if you have any like discussion points or anything like that, just put them in the comment section, or message me on Discord or whatever, and I would really like to talk about them, and we can even like kind of formulate even more feedback for the developers. So yeah, thank you for watching.